How's everybody doing? I really don't have prepared remarks. My new manager, Jean Straight, raise your hand. He's been getting me all over Switzerland. My first time here, I just turned 50 yesterday. And it's a tremendous gift. I got my first authentic Swiss Army knife because Jean assured me that my current Swiss Army knife was a a knockoff. It's a fake. It's no good. So I go right to the factory, and he proves himself right that I had a knockoff. Now I've got the real thing. So life is good.
Don't take it in carry-on luggage. They take it away.
Right. I could be an accomplice of the Taliban, so I have to put it on my checked baggage, not my carry-on. Exactly. Don't I look just like one of them? But anyway, I brought along some visual aids. Look at that. It's the exact same paper in PDF form. And since Sitges, which was my first time to Europe, and naturally first time to a Bilderberg meeting, learning as Jim Tucker's apprentice, since then I went from deputy editor to editor, so now rather than Jim being my editor, I'm his. And he's semi-retired, but he's still actually even more focused on the trilaterals and the Bilderbergs than he was before, because now he doesn't have to deal with all the day-to-day rushing around of the demands of editing the paper. So we've already reported twice that the trilaterals are meeting next April in Washington, D.C., which you may have heard of. It's not, like we have a total exclusive. But Jim pointed out very ably that the trilateral meetings are the precursor, typically, to Bilderberg. As you might recall, in Dublin, Ireland, a little while before the last Bilderberg meeting, the trilats met there. So where there's a trilat, there's a Bilderberg. It's almost like you're hunting game, wild game. You look for tracks. So look, there's a trilat track. Well, there must be Bilderberg tracks over here. So you're like a hunter, And so we're really tailing them hard. We're making plans right now on how to cover the trilateral meeting next April right in Washington, D.C. They just happen to put it right in our backyard. We don't have to buy plane tickets, no hotels. Now we can cover them for cheap. So that's a good thing. At any rate, there's a lot I could say and a lot of directions I could go. I guess the main thing I wanted to share tonight is, besides some stuff with American Free Press, is to sort of talk as much about inspiration as information. That is, there's a lot of reason for hope, despite all this dark and bad and depressing news we sometimes get. I always look for solutions and rays of hope and reasons to be cautiously optimistic about what's going on. And I believe that the tables are turning on the power brokers. There's a lot of signs that the EU is unraveling. I'll share you a couple of things. Last April, my son and I went over to a group right on the other side of the lake. I spend part of the year in Michigan, and we went to something called the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. It was this past April, and one sign that I think a lot of things are happening right now is I have never seen the CCGA, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, as busy as they are now. They're a cousin of the Council on Foreign Relations. As you know, the CFR meets in New York City. The CCGA meets in Chicago, and I have never seen them have so many meetings. These people have money to burn. They're spending, they must be spending $1 million a month hosting speakers and programs after programs. What about Europe? What about the U.S.? They seem to be almost overanalyzing their situation. Matter of fact, Wolfenson, this World Bank guy, is going to be speaking there December 15th, and I hope to go sit right in the front row and listen to him. And these meetings are ostensibly open to the public, and so what's nice about being in the media sometimes, although I don't generally wear a press badge when I go to the Chicago meetings, but what's nice is I'll go to their meetings and listen to them directly when they are meeting in the open, in public. And so I'll be doing that, I hope, this December 15th, go to Chicago, meet Mr. Wolfenson head on. I can tell him I, sell books for a living, or I fix cars, whatever. He doesn't need to know what I do. And maybe he'll give me some hints, maybe I'll glean something from that. But I think the elites are afraid that Europe's going to slip from their hands. And Switzerland, I'm finding very quickly, I think, is the key to preventing the EU from swallowing Europe completely. You are in the country, the right place, at the right time, right here, right now, to stop this thing. You have some good allies in Bern, in the Swiss parliament, such as Oskar Freisinger. You may not agree with everything he says. He's got some fellow legislators, a Mr. Beitig, and they've got a lot of interesting ideas, and they're willing to use the Swiss system of direct democracy to take the right sorts of ideas and use that lever to keep Switzerland independent, and in so doing, Switzerland remains a beacon of hope relative to the EU, where people can live in much more freedom and prosperity and have their firearms freedoms, have their ballot freedoms, the freedom to have the direct democracy, and all the things that are better about Switzerland than the EU. And so you're really in ground zero here to keep Switzerland free of the EU and to actually roll it back, because the longer you stay independent here in Switzerland, the more the EU is going to unravel under its own corruption. Meanwhile, you have, I think, who is an ally, he may not even think of himself that way, who's heard of this Nigel Farage? I hope he's on the level. You know, you see a lot of these people and you hope that they're, you know, true blue, they are who they say they are, and he's up there tearing the EU a new asshole, excuse my words. Every day he gets a chance, and it's really giving him a black eye on Ireland voting not to join the EU, and the EU pushes them into it anyway, and same thing for other nations. And so while the EU is taking a pounding from Nigel Farage, Switzerland has a lot of legislative opportunities to roll that back. And I can only really speak from my own experiences. Who has heard of something called accession? A concept called accession, to ascend. Okay, who's heard of secession? To secede from the Union, okay? In the context of the United States, you remember the war between the states. It really wasn't called it really wasn't a civil war. That was propaganda. It was the rebellion at first, and then they called it the war between the states. If I talk about that war, do we know what secession means? It means for like Georgia or the state of Alabama to secede, to leave the United States Union, where it would break up into a confederation, a more loose grouping of independent states, as opposed to this consolidated empire that the United States has unfortunately become, bombing and killing people 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's a disgrace to be an American right now in a lot of ways, and I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. But one of the things, and you'll find this interesting, and here it is on the screen. Maybe I don't need this. I'm so used to the old-fashioned way. One of the things we're doing, this is just a quick side note in American Free Press, is this issue back in September is when we really started a year-long campaign to expose 9/11. Between September of 2010 and the 10th year anniversary of 9/11, which is of course 2011, in that year's time, kicking off with this issue, AFP continues unstoppable mission to expose 9/11 lies. Even the so-called alternative press in the United States really won't touch 9/11 much, and this issue really kicked it off. And just so you know, we're with you on 9/11, we're with you on that issue. Every second or third or fourth issue, we've got another hard-hitting article as best we can to continue unraveling aspects of the official 9/11 story. Kind of like a big tapestry. You find the right thread and you pull it, and the whole thing unravels. And we continue to look for loose threads in the official conspiracy theory of the flying Muslims who flew with the greatest of ease and you know, circumvented every intelligence thing we have, and the whole just bullshit story. Excuse me, I gotta swear once in a while when I talk about that one. I may not be able to use that word on the news pages, but that's why I use it now. So, If you look in the upper left, you'll see Swiss accession idea could help release New World Order's stranglehold. Okay, what is accession? Well, it's worth knowing about because I think you're going to hear about it in the not too distant future coming out of your parliament. Okay, here's what it is. I don't know if all of you know the guy sitting with me in the picture on the right, but that is Francois de Siebenthal. He's a former Swiss banker a long time ago, and he saw the light, and he's become a freedom advocate. And this is me talking to him in Canada about the Swiss system, particularly the variety of monetary systems you have here, the different money systems, some of which are too much of the corporate world, but others that are more independent. A lot of the villages have independent money systems. There seems to be kind of a whole variety of different approaches to commerce in Switzerland. But what's interesting about this is it talks about Swiss accession liberating nations from the New World Order. Now what that means is that since Switzerland has maintained at least most of its traditions, its neutrality and its independence, relatively monetary freedom, and the ability to defend itself through its universal military service. And one of the things I want to really stress is the neutrality. Switzerland should take a lot of pride in not being an interventionist state where you send your troops into every conceivable corner of the world, like the U.S. And the U.S. now has, what, 700 and some military bases in at least 120 countries, which is absurd, okay? You don't defend a nation by sending all your troops away, and Americans nowadays actually believe they can maintain and increase their freedom by giving it away in this modern surveillance state. But Switzerland does not make the mistake of sending its armies as a professional army all over the world and leaving itself exposed. Even though I understand there's some trends involved to change that are very negative. But now, getting to the point, the concept of accession is the exact opposite of secession. So what it means is neighboring regions of other countries around Switzerland would join the Swiss Confederation. Imagine that. A little part of France, a little part of Italy, they're living under this straitjacket called the European Union. Imagine the Swiss nation growing and the EU shrinking, because as one happens, the other is inevitable. And so Francois was telling me about that in principle this accession thing can and should happen. And the article outlines some of the reasons for that, and it goes into some other things. So I just wanted you to be aware of this fascinating concept where this relatively free country you live in, yes, it's not perfect, but relatively free, can incrementally grow as the European Union loses its traction, its reputation. We have Nigel Farage, as I mentioned, the EU legislator up there just tearing them apart. And you really have an opportunity here, really more so than the United States. And that's really what I wanted to get across tonight, was that you're really at a perfect point in history and a perfect point on the map to roll back the New World Order. Every one of you. God put you here, and you're just in the right spot at the right time, and you got to take advantage of it. I want you to realize that. This is what I mean by being as much inspirational as I am informational. It's up to all of us. Newspapers help convey things, yes, you know, we write this, we write that. That's just to kind of help set sort of a framework in which we all act. We're all in this together. And so accession is a tricky thing. If you brought in, forgive my pronunciation, if you brought in Baden-Württemberg, is that how you say it? Yep. If you brought that in, I understand that you would have more people in that region of Germany than there are in all of Switzerland. Now, so it doesn't mean that it's a perfect idea. Certain regions may be more problematic than others, but what it does mean is Switzerland is this beacon compared to the rest of Europe that is being swallowed up, austerity measures killing Ireland, having just about killed Greece, And this is where the Bilderberg boys and all these guys, they start throwing their weight around. They want to squeeze you out. They want to put you down, put you under their collective boot. And so I just can't stress enough how good of a position that you're in here in this nation right now to try and, by keeping your own nation free and independent, and by looking at these ideas like accession logically and you know, objectively, you can begin to see how you can really get a grasp on what you already have and start pushing them back, while we in America do the best we can, despite the fact that we have an imperial government now that the citizenry and the concerns of the average American are as far away from them as Pluto is from the Earth. It's just true. I've spent a little time, as I noted, at your parliament, and your legislators have never even met me before. I'm just some stranger from another land. They're far more open to me than any congressman would be in the United States. I talked to some of them just off the cuff, no appointments made. They'd give me 15 minutes. Then tell me about the Swiss nation, tell me about things. And so you really have something here. You just can't do that in America. You know, you even look sideways walking in the halls of Congress and they'll just throw you out. You know, you have no voice there, really. And it's a sad thing. I'll share some other things about the paper now. I think I've gotten my message across. Did that sink in? Okay. I think it's important that you realize what you have here and that you use it to sustain it, grow it, and use it against this this encroaching European Union that stands on the brink of falling and crumbling if you play your cards right. And so it's this accession thing and the whole concept. Well, we can talk about it more during the question and answer. But moving on, let's go to another one of the newspaper. At the risk of sounding slightly promotional, we did a new page design, and I just want you to know this, because I can have copies of the paper sent here, and you might want to know kind of what we're about if you want to use it for an activist tool. Obviously, you've got other literature you use, and you can use whatever combination you see fit. But in case you want to do this, you'll see now that we have one major story on the front page, and it's made to copy on a regular 8.5 by 11 copy machine. On this one, we had all sorts of little articles that talk about what's on the inside. Now we're going with one major article on the front. And this is to make the paper more activist-oriented, to where you can take it, and if you don't have enough copies of the paper itself, you can copy the front page story. And we always put something on the front it has to be, of course, very important, but what we usually do is talk about solutions or positive developments, because not everything happening, as scary as it is bad. There's a lot of good people out there doing the right thing, and in America as well as here in Switzerland and whatnot. And this article talks about an activist, Aaron Bollinger, his name is down here, and he's what he has done is he's made a book of proposed laws. In other words, his book has model legislation in it, suggested laws that could be used. And what he does is he asks readers of the paper and other people to take his book and to take these different laws, and he writes the approximate language of each law, and then you take that not to necessarily to the federal government in the United States, but to like the Michigan state government or the Texas state government. Some of it could be for Washington, and he teaches people how to get to know their members of Congress or their state representatives, and how to lobby them in such a way. You're not really a lobbyist per se, but how to follow some of the techniques the lobbyists use, so that way your congressman or your member of parliament, you might say, kind of like in Europe, you can begin to influence them the way the lobbyists influence them. So we report on this guidebook that he writes, that he offers to give people proposed laws, model laws, and they can use that language change it a little the way they see fit. And here's what they do. They'll, like, if you had this book, you could take one of the examples of a model law, go to your state legislator and say, I don't want Pennsylvania participating in the Real ID Act. And in fact, Aaron Bollinger has had some success in getting different states, Pennsylvania I think is one, South Carolina, to not participate in the Real ID Act, or to pass laws that say you no longer have to provide your Social Security number when you're applying, like filling out a form. And maybe eventually you won't have to share your Social Security number when you get a bank account. And so you begin to unravel the matrix, the police state, one thread at a time. If more states don't take part in the Real ID Act, then it gets harder to have a nationwide biometric system with the Real ID cards. And so what Aaron is trying to do is get the states to rebel against the federal government. But not just holding up signs and, you know, throwing water balloons at them, as fun as that would be, or worse, but to actually draw up legislation, be a citizen lobbyist, do it right, get to know the right people, and get these states to pull out of this thing. And so we like to report on things that aren't always negative, but to actually show that there are people that have some tools and are trying to roll this thing back here over in the United States. And just as you have people in Parliament here in Switzerland that are, there's lots of things, some of which I can't even disclose yet, happening here in Switzerland that are, I think, potentially very beneficial to keep you even further out of the European Union. Even as we in the United States try to pull out of the Real ID Act and try to fight these new naked scanners, where we all become a centerfold, I guess you might say, at the airports. And that's what this article's about. It starts out hands off, and we talk about this guy that made himself famous. He's from California, that said, "Don't touch my junk." And he sort of set off a firestorm. But we don't just talk about that, as I noted. We talk about, okay, the TSA in the United States wants to touch your junk. Okay, we could complain about that, or we could talk about something more constructive. And in this case, it's this guy I mentioned, Aaron Bollinger, model laws, examples and ways we can approach our government that might work to get rid of this stuff, to push the TSA back into its cage, maybe to get rid of these scanners someday, certainly to pull out of the Real ID, and so on and so forth. We just look for every solution we can, as opposed to getting into prophecy or the end game or the end times. We don't believe at American Free Press that we're prophets. We don't believe we're that smart, but we stay away from prophecy. We stay away from doomsaying. We read the handwriting on the wall. We know when things are serious, but we always look for rays of hope and solutions. That's why I mentioned Switzerland. Switzerland certainly is a beacon of hope, and there's things going on in the U.S. too. And I want to establish more ties with American Free Press between the U.S. and Switzerland so we can work together. And that's why I'm here. I met some of you guys like Andrew and others at Bilderberg, and I knew that I had the right stuff. How did I know this? I'd say, I wouldn't even make a request. I'd be at this hotel with my assistant Angie and Jim Tucker, and I'd say, yeah, if you can get a few pictures, that'd be fine, you know. And some of the We Are Change people from here would come back to the hotel 5 hours later with scratches on their arms, having crawled in the hills, looking down on the Dolce Hotel, with every tool at their disposal. I mean, everything but building a tunnel under the ground and popping up inside the hotel. And I go, my God. And a guy named Thomas said, I don't have much, you know, I did the best I could. He handed me like 500 photos on a little disc. And I just couldn't believe you guys. I mean, the only newspaper there doing any hard work besides my own was the Guardian, this Charlie Skelton guy. And he had a really good photographer, admittedly, that had a lens, you know, 5 feet long. And he's the one that ultimately got these pictures of Donald Graham and your friend and mine, Henry Kissinger, and all these dorks that go to these things. And but I knew then that I had some real allies here, you know, people that were really willing to go the extra mile to expose these clowns. And so that's why I'm here, and not just to see your wonderful country and learn about it, but to hook up with you guys and to note that AFP and just me as a person, even besides the paper, we need to set up more alliances between what we do in the U.S. and here. We Are Change started in the U.S., as I understand it, with Luke Radowski. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I met Luke, my wife Angie and I met Luke in New York City in 2007. I couldn't believe this guy either. I mean, he goes up to the Pratt House, the CFR headquarters, and he's got his megaphone, what, 5 feet away from the door. He's just screaming at him. And the whole place is coming apart. Cop cars are pulling out, you know. They're like, oh no, they're going after Rockefeller's place, you know. Oh, you know, like we're going to do something, you know, violent or something. And I'm just standing there observing. And then it really got fun. I can remember walking to 65th Street, I think it is, to David Rockefeller's townhouse. They're outside that place, you know, megaphones. Just, I was hoping his head would pop out the door or something. No such luck. But what I'm saying is I knew Luke was a real fighter then, a real leader. And so if your organization comes from him, I think that it shows good roots in what you do. And he marched for blocks. I'd never seen such energy. And you know, I was about wobbling on one leg, ready to get some beers and call it a day, and he just kept going and going and going. So, you know, the whole We Are Change thing, I think, is a great kind of grassroots viral movement. And so that's the way I see, you know, the way we're going to beat this thing. The dominant media, you know, New York Times, the New Pork Times, as I call it, the Washington Compost, all these papers, the only thing they have, and it's funny, I met a businessman today in Switzerland. He said the same thing in another context. He says, you can have a poor product and sell it well if you distribute it well. And you can have a great product that won't go anywhere if you don't distribute it. And I said, you know, kind of like, dude, you know, you just nailed it down. And briefly, I shared the fact that we have a pretty good newspaper, but we could use more distribution, and yet you get the New Pork Times, the Compost, all these papers, and really their message isn't what makes them influential. It's the fact that they can put that paper in a lot of hands in front of your face every day, 365 days a year, efficiently in large numbers. It's just a numbers game. So with groups like yours and similar ones in other countries, we have this viral way of getting information around. And it's not just American Free Press, that's one pillar of this whole thing. But that's why we made the front page the way we did. So you can get some papers, but if you run out, you can copy the front page article and hand it out. Granted, sometimes you don't always have English reading, English speaking audiences. Sometimes you have to improvise. But another thing that my boss okayed the other day, and I don't think it's premature to at least announce this as a possibility. This is kind of a big announcement. So drum roll. Well, I could do one myself, but there's a possibility, only a possibility, that American Free Press might do a foreign version. And it may never happen, but I'm going to check into it, because we all know you can send a PDF over online, go to another printer, and voila, there it is. You don't have to ship papers from the US when you can print them here. So you can imagine maybe this, you know, maybe it's English or French on the front, and maybe you turn it around and a couple articles in back are written in German. And then you have something where you break that language barrier, you know. Although I know a lot of people read English as sort of a universal language. I'll let you know, I'll let key people know, such as you, Dominic, if this might become a possibility. But what I'm saying is, with what's going on here and what's going on in the States and the unique opportunities I've already mentioned that you have in Switzerland, and the way we can bridge things from AFP to here during the normal course of the year, but especially at big high points like Bilderberg meetings, through all this, we can begin through your viral movement and through my editorship of the paper and really trying to make the paper more appealing to the average person, through all this, we can take that numbers game that the dominant media does and begin to roll it back, just as the Swiss system is really threatening to roll the EU system back by kind of outlasting it or staring it down and sort of beating it through attrition. So I'm sort of summarizing now, but I just see a lot of reasons to be optimistic, cautiously so, yes, but optimistic, to expand AFP's influence as your own influence grows, as you realize the opportunities you have here. And so at this extremely pivotal point in history, you can't even get a better point in history to roll this back. The EU stands at a precipice. Either they grow or I think they die. I'll just mention that I think I lost a little context when I mentioned that Chicago Council on Foreign Relations group. I went and heard the former Spanish Prime Minister, Jose Maria Aznar, yeah. And he walks in and his hair is entirely too black for his age. It looked like a huge toupee. It was kind of funny, but he walks in and proceeds to give the most boring, and I'd have to say a speech completely devoid of almost any content at all. The guy spoke for 45 minutes about almost nothing. And it proved the old adage that these New World Order lights they're influential and they're wealthy, but they're really not that bright. It's all about power. They've got gonads, they've got audacity, they've got money, but they really aren't as sharp. I think they have to put all themselves together in one room to get an IQ of 150 or something. Kind of a multiplier effect. As I say, it's all about numbers, right? So, he's talking, but one thing he said that had any semblance of logic at all was he actually said that he had to admit to this group of Chicago-level CFR types that maybe some of the power at the European Union needs to devolve back to the local level. He was kind of admitting that they just can't put it all under one roof and make all these formerly sovereign nations march to their tune. He was sort of lamenting all this, sort of like, we tried to dominate them, but we can't, They just won't fall in line. What do we do? But in the most boring, I'm saying it in a more interesting way than he did. He had as much personality as a cinder block. But it showed me that they're willing to acknowledge that they can't get all the power they want all at once. So they're a little bit wobbly, they're a little bit weak, they're kind of going like this, and through everything I've described tonight, we need to kick them over and tie them up and throw them down the deepest hole to hell that exists, kind of like the end of the Lord of the Rings when he goes down the fire pit. You can't be nice to these people. They like to play hardball. Sometimes you got to play hardball back, but with good tactics. One thing that they have over us is they're such good tacticians. They look at this like a chessboard, and we're the pawns, and they're these bishops and knights and kings and queens. Yeah, Dominic's reminding me of what's called the kind of a twister, the Hegelian dialectic, named after this German philosopher, George Hegel, and they create a problem, and they create a proposed counter problem, or sort of the opposite, sort of like false alternatives, but all in the end, as many of you may know, their goal is over here, and so they synthesize the so-called opposing forces into their solution. So I can't help but mention this because now you spark something else, and I'll wind up fairly quickly here. One of my colleagues at AFP, Michael Collins Piper, is writing about something that's a perfect example of what Dominic reminded me of. What's going on now in the American press is all of a sudden people that hated third parties, they've told us forever in America that all we need is a Democrat or a Republican. There's nothing else. No other parties, they say. A donkey or an elephant. Great choices, right? You want lager or lager? Okay, so now all of a sudden the establishment says, oh no man, a third party is a great idea. What were we thinking? And so now the Washington Compost, the New York Times, all these papers are saying, voila, we need a third party. which they've never said before, but what they're trying to do is create their own third party, and they're calling it centrist, and they're trying to tell us that Bill Clinton is not a leftist or a rightist, but in the center. And so they want to drag Bill Clinton back into the arena, at least that's one idea, and create a fake third party in the U.S. because they know there's rebellion. They did hijack most of the Tea Party movement, I'm sorry to say. Most of them got neoconned. Not all of it, but most of it. But they saw that the natives were getting restless, so now they want to create a fake, counterfeit third party to draw people away from the Democrats and Republicans and give them the idea that they're getting a real alternative. Kind of like, and these are the same people that ruined most of the Tea Party. They've got most of the Tea Partiers believing we should bomb Iran and drive Islam off the face of the earth. Don't we have better things to do than that? I mean, it's absurd. Oh yeah, let's kill Iranians. That's the solution to everything. And so that's a great example of the Hegelian dialectic. The Democrats and Republicans are false options. Give us the actual goal, which may have been, they might have planned this 20 years ago, the actual goal to steer us into a one-party system that right now they're calling a third party, right? Give us three, and maybe the one party is the one they wanted all along, get rid of two, and then you only have one. But then again, Democrats and Republicans kind of operate as one. You know, you see cartoons where a elephant has a donkey's ears or a donkey has an elephant's nose. It's kind of like that. At any rate, you know, I could go on and on if you don't stop me, but I think you get the drift. You got a really good opportunity here. These are some of the observations and ideas that if we team up as best we can, at least a loose alliance between what we're doing in the States and what you're doing here, we can do a lot of good at just the right time. And let's turn it over to questions that you might have for me or Dominic, and that's really enough to say for now. So.
Pumping fluoride in the water while they rape Iraqi daughters. Dumbing down the public fashion magazines and fodder. Now they slaughter weaker nations. Faulty explanations selling fear to the mass. Terror level elevation. Revelations is unfolding right before your eyes. Wake up in a FEMA camp, drugged and hypnotized. Fourth Reich's taking over, but you're all about your blink. I bet by this point you haven't heard a damn thing. It's destruction by design, prophesizing every script. Take a big step back, see the whole picture. A distraction of the mind to keep you living in a bubble.
We're in a lot of trouble because less than 3% of you people read books, because less than 15% of you read newspapers, and when the 12th largest company in the world controls the most awesome goddamn propaganda force in the whole godless world, who knows what shit will be better with.
So now it's problem, action, reaction, solution. It's time to wake up to the formula they're using. State-sponsored terror to burn our constitution. Weapons of mass deception of the media delusions. Using double speak to keep you following like sheep. CNN and Fox News to keep the populace asleep. Don't look, don't question, as we fall into depression. The dollar's worth a nickel, but we're ruled by our possession. I mentioned that those powers fell in less than an hour. Ignorance is bliss, the source of their power. Watching power in the shadows when we all wake up and see the land that we're living in is nothing close to free. It's destruction by design, prophesizing every script. Take a big step back, see the whole picture. A distraction of the mind to keep you living in a bubble.
We're in a lot of trouble